Today's topic is comparative and superlative adjectives in German. As the name implies, these are the forms of adjectives that you will use when using that adjective for the purposes of comparison, which noun is bigger, faster, smaller, slower, etc. Let's start with comparative adjectives. Well, you'll use these when comparing two nouns. As in English, the basis for creating comparative adjectives is to add er to an adjective. For instance, you could say, Dein Hund ist schnell, aber mein Hund ist schneller. Or, Meine Katze ist klein, aber deine Katze ist kleiner. In both cases, er has been added to the end of the adjective to show the comparison. So this seems like a pretty intuitive thing for an English speaker to do, but there are a couple aspects of this that often trip English speakers up. First of all, when the original adjective is one syllable, and its vowel is capable of adding an umlaut, in other words, if its vowel is an A, O, or U, then the comparative form will usually add that umlaut as well as the er ending. So for instance, you'd say, Die Frau ist groß, aber der Mann ist größer. Because groß is a single syllable adjective with an O, you add an umlaut as well. Or you could say, Meine Großmutter ist alt, aber mein Großvater ist älter. Because alt is a single syllable adjective with an A, you add an umlaut as well as the er. The next thing that often trips English speakers up is the word for than, as in my grandmother is older than my grandfather. A common mistake is to take words like den or dan, which sound temptingly like than, but neither is correct here. The word you need is als. Here's how that would look. Der Hund ist jünger als die Katze. Das Haus ist älter als das Auto. Das Eis ist kälter als der Kaffee. Or das Wetter war schöner am Mittwoch als am Dienstag. Here's another thing that English speakers often end up overthinking. In English, we sometimes add an er to adjectives, and sometimes we have to just put the word more in front of the adjective. We say more interesting, not interestinger, and more boring, not boringer. This means we often try to do this in German, but you actually don't need to. Every single German adjective can be turned into its comparative form by just adding that er. For instance, ich finde das Buch interessanter als den Film. Mathe ist langweilig, aber Bio ist langweiliger. Meine Katze ist intelligenter als mein Hund. Here's a quick note about some nitpicky grammar, which is kind of the point of these videos after all. English speakers have a tendency to mess up their pronouns when making comparisons. We say things like, she is older than me, or he is taller than her. This has to some extent become accepted usage in English, even though it's technically and officially incorrect. You should say, he is taller than she, because technically, those two pronouns are sharing the verb is. If you added the verbs to the end, he is taller than she is, or she is older than I am, it becomes much more obvious that me and her were the wrong pronouns in the first place. So while it has become somewhat acceptable to make those mistakes in English, German speakers tend not to do that. When using pronouns in comparisons, you need to get their cases right. As a general rule, the two nouns being compared should probably be in the same case. So if you said, Der Hund ist kleiner als der Junge, both nouns should be in the nominative case because they're sharing the verb ist. Or if you say, Max findet das Buch besser als den Film, Buch and Film should both be in the accusative case because they are both direct objects. They are being found by Max. You're saying that Max finds the book better than he finds the film. If you said, besser als der Film, then you'd be saying that Max finds the book better than the film finds the book, which probably can't happen. Going back to pronouns for a moment, if I said, Max findet das Buch besser als ich, then I'm saying that Max finds the book better than I find it. But if I make that common English speaker mistake and say, Max findet das Buch besser als mich, Now I'm saying that Max finds the book better than he finds me. That may in fact be true, but chances are it's not what I meant. Let's move on to superlative forms. Superlative forms are used when comparing more than two nouns. Again, this is nitpicky, but when you only have two things to compare, neither of them can be the tallest, shortest, or best. They can only be taller, shorter, or better than the other one. So you should only use superlative forms when comparing more than two nouns. As in English, the basis for superlative adjectives is the letter combination st added to the adjective, as in tallest, shortest, smallest, etc. Superlative forms are often used in combination with the preposition am. For instance, meine Schwester ist am kleinsten, or das rote Auto ist am schnellsten. As with comparative forms, single-syllable adjectives with a's, o's, and u's will usually add umlauts, and just like you don't say more something or other in German, you also don't say most something or other in German. So warm becomes am wärmsten, kalt becomes am kältesten, langweilig becomes am langweiligsten, or interessant becomes am interessantesten. By the way, you'll notice that adjectives like kalt and interessant that end in t have to add an extra e before the st ending to make it pronounceable. That sten formulation is great when the adjective is separated from the noun, but when you want to put the adjective before the noun, you don't use that formulation. You just use the plain old adjective plus that st plus an adjective ending. For instance, you could say meine kleinste Schwester heißt Mia. Der längste Tag im Jahr ist im Juni. Mein ältestes Meerschweinchen heißt Marshmallow. And you've added st to each of those adjectives, umlauts to the single-syllable ones that are capable of adding umlauts, and then an adjective ending after that st superlative form. Adjective endings can be complicated, and for many English speakers, they're downright terrifying. So if you're not feeling ready for them just yet, that's fine. You can just use that blanksten formulation. If you're curious about adjective endings, feel free to check out my rather obviously titled video, Adjective Endings, to learn more. Finally, just be aware that while the overwhelming majority of German adjectives can be made into their comparative forms simply by adding er, and their superlative forms simply by adding st, there are some rare exceptions where the word changes entirely. These just need to be learned separately. Some common exceptions are gut, which turns into besser and am besten, gern, which becomes lieber or am liebsten, and viel, which becomes mehr or am meisten. One last thing to touch on briefly. When you make an equal comparison, the phrase to use in German is so blank wie, as in meine Katze ist so alt wie deine Katze, or mein Haus ist so groß wie dein Haus. The equivalent phrase in English here is as blank as. The thing to keep in mind is that the adjective itself will remain in its original form, not a comparative or superlative form. Let's review. When making equal comparisons, use the phrase so blank wie. When comparing two nouns, create a comparative form by adding er to the end of the adjective. If it's one syllable and can add an umlaut, you probably should add an umlaut. And then you use the phrase als to compare things. When comparing more than two nouns, create superlative forms by adding st to the end of the adjective. You may need the phrase am blanksten. Thanks for watching, and happy Germaning!